wish you were dead." These 4 words, whispered with chilling resolve, became a final promise before the lights went out. What drives a mother to turn on her own child, or a lifelong confidant to orchestrate a betrayal written in blood? At The Invisible Evidence, we peel back the layers of the human psyche to uncover the darkness hiding in plain sight. Please be advised, the following accounts contain visceral, disturbing details that may be difficult for some viewers. Before we step into the shadows, a heartfelt thank you to our community. Your shares, likes, and comments are the heartbeat of this channel, helping us shine a light on these forgotten stories. If you're new here, we invite you to join us. Drop your location in the comments from where you're watching now. Hit subscribe, and let's begin. Case 1. On September 15th, 2006, in East St. Louis, Illinois, a long-term friendship reached a catastrophic conclusion. Jamela Tunstall, 7 months pregnant, arrived at the home of Tiffany Hall. The 2 women had been companions since kindergarten, maintaining a bond so deep that Tunstall entrusted Hall with the care of her 3 children, 7-year-old Diamond, 2-year-old Ivan, and 1-year-old Janella. Hall's actions that day were not the result of a sudden impulse, but a calculated violation of that established trust. Investigative findings later confirmed that Hall utilized a blunt object to render Tunstall unconscious before removing the unborn fetus. Tunstall was discovered in a vacant lot days later, but the investigation into her death was only the beginning of a broader search for her missing children. That same evening, Hall arrived at Frank Holton State Park, where she contacted emergency services. She informed responders that she had experienced a stillbirth. Medical staff noted that Hall was highly resistant to any form of physical examination, creating an immediate point of suspicion for the attending personnel. 3 days later, Hall contacted the father of Tunstall's children. She provided a fabricated account, claiming that Tunstall had requested that Hall retrieve the 3 children. Given their history and their status as best friends, the father did not question her request. Diamond, Ivan, and Janella were then transported to the location where Hall had been staying. Forensic evidence subsequently established that shortly after arriving at the apartment, the children were fatally harmed. Their remains were later located inside household appliances, a washing machine and a dryer, within the unit. The investigation turned when Hall attempted to legitimize her claim to the stolen fetus. 6 days after the initial incident, she organized a funeral service for the child, who she had named Taylor Horn. During this process, she signed a legal affidavit asserting maternity. This attempt to formalize the situation proved to be her undoing. Under the pressure of maintaining a multi-layered deception, Hall eventually disclosed the events to her boyfriend. He contacted local law enforcement immediately. On June 9, 2008, Tiffany Hall entered a plea of guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder. The court sentenced her to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As of July 2026, Hall remains incarcerated within the Illinois Department of Corrections. The case remains a stark example of how social trust can be exploited by individuals who operate with calculated, hidden intent, leaving a community to grapple with the failures of interpersonal safety. Case 2. On June 11, 2012, in Jonesboro, Georgia, a domestic dispute at a residence on Carnes Estates Drive escalated into a fatal confrontation between 47-year-old Delois D. Autry and her 24-year-old daughter, Takea Gathridge. The event marked a definitive end to years of financial and emotional support provided by Autry to her unemployed daughter. The days leading up to the incident were characterized by an overt deterioration of the domestic environment. Neighbors and witnesses documented that Gathridge had repeatedly expressed explicit hostility toward her mother, frequently stating a desire for her mother's death. Despite these verbal indicators, Autry initially sought to manage the situation by changing the locks on the home. However, she eventually allowed Gathridge to return, representing a critical point where internal boundary enforcement failed to mitigate the rising risk. On that Monday morning, mother and daughter appeared at the Clayton County Magistrate Court for a scheduled eviction hearing. The presiding judge ruled against Gathridge, granting her a 7-day period to vacate the premises. This legal action, intended to restore order to the household, instead served as a catalyst for the final confrontation. Upon returning to Carnes Estates Drive, the argument transitioned from the legal ruling to demands for transportation funds. When Autry refused, the verbal conflict turned physical. Forensic investigators found that Gathridge bypassed traditional conflict resolution by entering the kitchen and retrieving a serrated knife. Autry's stepson, Frank, was present during the altercation. He reported hearing his name shouted by Autry as she was pinned onto the living room sofa. Frank's attempt to intervene resulted in him sustaining injuries to his hands as he struggled to disarm Gathridge. Despite his efforts, Gathridge inflicted multiple wounds upon her mother. Autry's final directive to Frank was to seek emergency assistance. When local law enforcement arrived, Gathridge was found at the residence. She provided a statement admitting to the act, and when prompted by dispatchers regarding the administration of aid, she explicitly refused. A jury trial later resulted in a conviction on all counts, leading to a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This case highlights a systemic failure regarding the transition from legal disputes to crisis intervention. While the court system addressed the eviction, it lacked the mechanisms to mandate a psychological evaluation for an individual exhibiting clear behavioral red flags. The tragedy serves as a sober reminder of the limitations of property-based legal solutions when underlying mental health crises remain unaddressed. Case 3. On August 28, 2013, in Aurora, Colorado, 47-year-old Yoon-Mi Hoi was killed in her residence. The incident followed an extended period of domestic tension between Hoi and her 18-year-old daughter, Isabella Guzman. The days preceding the event were marked by a clear escalation in behavioral volatility. Just 24 hours prior to the fatal confrontation, Guzman had physically demonstrated her hostility by spitting in her mother's face. This, combined with a series of written threats, including a direct message stating, "You will pay," created a documented pattern of danger. Yoon-Mi Hoi, a photographer who frequently worked extended hours, reached a point of genuine fear. She had contacted local law enforcement regarding her daughter's behavior, and the police had responded to the home, warning Guzman to cease her conduct. Additionally, Hoi requested that her husband, Ryan Hoi, stay in their bedroom during the night to serve as a layer of protection. On the final day, Guzman met with her biological father, Robert, in the backyard of the home. Robert later testified that he believed he was making progress in de-escalating his daughter's state of mind. However, this interaction proved to be ineffective. At approximately 9:30 p.m., Hoi arrived home from work and went upstairs to use the bathroom. Moments later, Ryan Hoi heard the sound of a struggle occurring on the second floor and the voice of his wife calling for help. He attempted to enter the bathroom, but found the door locked from the inside. When he peered through a gap, he witnessed Guzman inside before the door was forcefully slammed shut. Following a period of silence and the sounds of physical trauma, Guzman exited the bathroom. She was observed holding a knife in her right hand. She did not speak to her stepfather as she passed him and exited the house, dressed in a pink sports bra and turquoise shorts. Forensic teams discovered that Hoi had been subjected to 79 stab wounds, 31 to the face and 48 to the neck. Guzman was apprehended 16 hours later in a nearby parking garage. During the subsequent legal proceedings, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She remains confined at the Colorado Mental Health Institute at Pueblo as of July 2026. This case exposes a critical systemic gap: the lack of robust mechanisms to mandate inpatient psychiatric intervention when a domestic threat arises from within a household, rendering standard protection orders insufficient. Case 4. On June 10, 2008, in the quiet community of Whitewater, Colorado, the life of 64-year-old real estate developer Alan Helmick was abruptly ended in his own kitchen. The perpetrator was his wife, Miriam Helmick. Their union had begun at a dance class, where Miriam presented herself as an elegant, professional instructor. By the time of the fatal event, she had successfully integrated herself into Alan's financial life, including securing ownership of a horse ranch and funding for a dance studio. The investigation into Alan's death revealed a calculated history of violent intent that extended back years. In 2002, Miriam's previous husband, Jack Calloway Giles died from a gunshot wound in their Jacksonville, Florida home. That incident was officially categorized as a suicide, a label that Miriam utilized to evade suspicion in subsequent years. Shortly after that event, she was also linked to a fire that destroyed her father's residence in Florida. 40 days prior to Alan Helmick's murder, Miriam initiated a direct attempt on his life. She rigged a destructive device inside the gas tank of his vehicle while it was parked at a business in Delta, Colorado. When the car ignited, Alan survived the event, though he remained unaware of the deliberate nature of the attack. On the evening of June 10th, Miriam approached Alan from behind while he stood in their kitchen and discharged a firearm into the back of his head. Following the act, she staged the residence to simulate a robbery and contacted emergency services. To further obscure her trail, she planted threatening notes around the property, attempting to lead investigators toward a phantom assailant. She then fled to Florida, where she assumed the identity of Sharon Helmick, the name of Alan's deceased first wife. To avoid detection, the investigative breakthrough relied on forensic ballistics. Technicians recovered a projectile from Alan's skull and compared it to evidence preserved from the 2002 death of Jack Calloway Giles in Florida. The matching markings proved that the same weapon had been utilized in both instances. Miriam Helmick was eventually captured, tried, and found guilty by a Mesa County jury on charges of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and multiple counts of forgery. She received a sentence of life imprisonment without parole, plus an additional 78 years. She remains at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility as of July 2026. This case illustrates a recurring systemic failure, the tendency for authorities to treat property crimes and suspicious suicides in isolation. When insurance and real estate fraud are viewed only as financial crimes, investigators often miss the underlying pattern of domestic predation. The Helmick case highlights the necessity of cross-jurisdictional data sharing, which is the only reliable method for uncovering predators who move across state lines to exploit the trust of their spouses. Case 5. On November 3, 2003, in a quiet residence on Kyle Street in Mark Center, Ohio, 34-year-old Robert Breininger was killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. His 10-year-old son, Corey, was the only witness present. Corey informed the responding officers that he and his father had been practicing firearm safety when the weapon discharged accidentally. Due to the lack of contradictory physical evidence at the time, authorities officially recorded the death as an accidental tragedy. For the subsequent decade, Judith Hockey, who was Robert's wife and Corey's stepmother, maintained control over the narrative. She successfully collected nearly $500,000 from a life insurance policy she had quietly secured on Robert's life shortly before his death. While the community viewed Hockey as a grieving widow raising her stepson, the domestic environment was, in reality, a site of systematic psychological and physical coercion. Forensic investigations conducted after the case was reopened later revealed that between the ages of 7 and 10, Corey had been subjected to severe abuse. Hockey had methodically broken the child's will, creating a dynamic where he believed his survival depended on absolute obedience to her commands. By the time he reached his 10th birthday, Hockey had coerced the boy into handling a loaded firearm, pointing it at his father, and discharging the weapon. She then forced him to lie to law enforcement, ensuring his silence with threats that kept him complicit for 10 years. The breakthrough occurred when Corey reached the age of 20. He walked into a former teacher's classroom, shedding the decade-long facade and providing a detailed account of the coercion. The FBI's Crimes Against Children Task Force and the Defiance County Sheriff's Office reopened the file, shifting the case from an accident to a deliberate homicide. During the trial, the prosecution presented evidence of Hawk's insurance fraud, painting a clear picture of a predatory individual who viewed family members as financial assets. Despite Hawk's attempt to frame the event as a deliberate act by the son, the jury returned a guilty verdict on charges including aggravated murder, insurance fraud, and child endangerment. The presiding judge labeled her conduct as evil beyond description. Hockey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As of July 2026, she remains incarcerated in the Ohio prison system. This case exposes the accidental death loophole, a systemic failure where initial investigative superficiality allows predators to evade justice. When authorities fail to conduct comprehensive forensic or psychological reviews in child-involved shootings. They inadvertently provide a sanctuary for systemic abusers. This case underscores the necessity for mandatory psychological advocacy and deeper forensic vetting in all childhood-related firearm incidents. Case 6. On August 26, 1992, in Upper Merion Township, Pennsylvania, the death of 5-month-old Ryan Borley was initially classified by the coroner as sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. The caregiver, 19-year-old Melissa Haskell, had been looking after the infant for several months. Following the event, Haskell informed the family she had discovered the child unresponsive in his crib. While the autopsy indicated bruising consistent with airway obstruction and swelling in the infant's organs, the lack of immediate criminal witnesses led investigators to close the file. The case remained dormant for 19 years. During that period, Haskell's actions were obscured by a series of fragmented disclosures to associates, including her husband, Michael, his brother, and eventually, a local priest. Each individual was instructed by the others to maintain silence regarding the true circumstances of Ryan's death. This wall of secrecy persisted until 2011, when Michael Haskell, fearing for the safety of his own children, approached local authorities. To secure evidence, investigators arranged for Michael to wear a police wire during a conversation with his wife. The resulting recording provided the first definitive account of the crime. When Michael challenged her with the truth, Melissa Haskell admitted to the act, stating that she had placed her hand over the infant's mouth and nose to stop him from crying while she was suffering from heroin withdrawal. She had also previously admitted to feeding the infant alcohol. Following this confession, the coroner's office officially reopened the investigation and reclassified the death as a homicide. Haskell was subsequently arrested and charged. During the 2012 trial, the recorded evidence proved insurmountable. A jury found her guilty of third-degree murder, and she was sentenced to a term of 10 to 20 years in prison. The Melissa Haskell case serves as a critical lesson on the systemic failure to reevaluate causes of death when new information surfaces. It highlights the dangers of relying solely on an initial, often limited, coroner's ruling when clinical findings, such as bruising or internal trauma, clearly contradict a natural death diagnosis. The case underscores the need for protocols that allow for the automatic reopening of infant death investigations if witness statements or credible new evidence surface years later. It remains a stark reminder that in forensic investigations, the final word is often merely a starting point that requires constant vigilance and the courage to challenge established conclusions when the truth contradicts the record. Case 7. On August 2, 2004, in Fayette County, Georgia, a double homicide occurred that shattered the sanctuary of a family home. The victims, 74-year-old Carl Collier and 73-year-old Sarah Collier, had welcomed their 15-year-old granddaughter, Holly Ann Harvey, into their home only 3 months prior. Harvey, whose mother was incarcerated for drug-related offenses and whose father had been absent since her early childhood, was provided a stable environment by the Colliers, who were active in their church and community. The motivation for the violence was rooted in the teenagers' rejection of the household's behavioral expectations. Harvey and her 16-year-old girlfriend, Sandy Ketchum, had been instructed to cease substance use and avoid seeing one another. These boundaries triggered a retaliatory plan. Evidence presented during the investigation showed that Harvey and Ketchum meticulously planned the event in the basement, even practicing with a knife on a mattress to ensure the blade's efficacy. The forensic investigators uncovered a chilling piece of physical evidence. Harvey had used a pen to write a 4-word checklist directly onto her arm: kill, keys, money, jewelry. This sequence dictated the actions they took when the couple walked downstairs that afternoon to retrieve a suitcase. Harvey attacked her grandmother first, stabbing her in the back. When the grandfather Carl intervened, a violent struggle ensued. The couple attempted to defend themselves and call for help, but Harvey forcibly removed the telephone cord from the wall. Both victims sustained at least 15 stab wounds each, resulting in fatal injuries. Following the act, the two girls fled 230 miles to Tybee Island, where they were apprehended by police 17 hours later. Harvey entered a plea of guilty to 2 counts of malice murder and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. As of July 2026, She remains incarcerated at the Lee Arundel State Prison in Georgia. This tragedy highlights a systemic failure regarding the supervision of at-risk youth placed in domestic foster situations. Social service agencies often struggle to maintain oversight when the domestic environment is managed by extended family members who may lack the resources to handle the complex behavioral patterns resulting from the child's previous instability. The Harvey case serves as a lesson in the necessity for comprehensive support structures, not just for the child, but for the guardians. When foster and domestic placement protocols fail to integrate mandatory behavioral health resources, stable environments can quickly become volatile. Vigilance in monitoring drug-related instability and ensuring that guardians have access to professional crisis intervention are essential steps in preventing the escalation of domestic unrest into irreversible tragedy. Case 8. In March 2011, in the Cypress Hills public housing complex in Brooklyn, New York, a long-standing friendship between two young women ended in a fatal act of violence. Kamisha Richards, a 22-year-old John Jay College graduate and employee at J.P. Morgan Chase, was preparing for her law school entrance exams. She shared a deep connection with 18-year-old Kayla Henriques. Their families had lived in close proximity for years, and Kamisha was currently dating Henriques' brother. The catalyst for the tragedy was a $20 loan. Kamisha had lent the money to Henriques under the condition that it be used for essential supplies for Henriques' 1-year-old child. When Kamisha discovered the funds had not been used for their intended purpose, the tension between the two escalated. Unlike private disputes of the past, this disagreement played out on Facebook, creating a public digital record of the intensifying animosity. Kamisha wrote a direct post stating, "I will be needing that $20. This is the last time you will con me into giving you money." Henriques responded with a cryptic warning, "Then try to expose me, mama. See you when you get from work." Kamisha replied, "Trust, I am, have the last laugh," to which Henriques typed two final words, "We will see." These digital footprints were not merely expressions of frustration. They became the focal point of the subsequent police investigation. Law enforcement treated the Facebook exchange as evidence of premeditation. The following evening, at approximately 10:30 p.m., the two women met face-to-face inside an apartment in the complex. The confrontation escalated into a physical altercation, during which Henriques produced a knife and struck Kamisha once in the chest, piercing her heart. The aftermath was marked by a chilling lack of awareness regarding the permanent nature of the digital record. Before the page was removed, Henriques posted a final message from her BlackBerry, expressing performative condolences for the woman she had just killed. This post further cemented the state's case regarding her awareness of the act. Henriques was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and criminal possession of a weapon. Her case proceeded through the Brooklyn Supreme Court, where the social media evidence was presented to illustrate the direct line between digital threats and fatal action. The case of Kamisha Richards stands as a stark lesson on the systemic failure to recognize the escalation of cyberbullying. In the modern era, threats issued on social media platforms are frequently dismissed by peers and authorities alike as drama. This tragedy underscores the necessity for schools, parents, and community leaders to treat digital warnings as credible indicators of potential physical danger. It serves as a haunting reminder that in an increasingly connected world, the boundary between a digital disagreement and a fatal encounter is often much thinner than we are prepared to admit. Case 9. On September 3, 1998, in a public housing unit within St. Paul, Minnesota, a catastrophic event occurred that forced local authorities to confront the intersection of extreme psychological distress and profound cultural isolation. Koa Her, a 25-year-old mother who had emigrated from Laos, systematically ended the lives of her 6 children: Kwai, 11, Samson, 9, Nali, 8, Tang Long, 7, A, 6, and Tang K, 5, before attempting to take her own life. The background to this event was defined by a lifetime of instability. Born in the mountains of Laos in 1973, Her had experienced the displacement of war, refugee camp confinement in Thailand, and a forced arranged marriage at age 12 to a man named Tu Hong. By age 21, she had borne 6 children in rapid succession while living in an environment characterized by frequent police intervention for domestic violence. By 1998, her was unemployed, facing eviction, and living in complete social isolation. On the morning of the tragedy, her dressed in a vivid red ceremonial gown. After her 4 oldest children returned from school, she summoned each child to her side and ended their lives using a piece of black cloth. Following the act, she attempted to hang herself from a light fixture, but the equipment failed, and she fell to the floor, sustaining injuries. She then contacted 911 to report what she had done. During the investigation, Her's defense presented a psychological context that many in the Western legal system found difficult to process. She had convinced herself that her actions were an act of altruism. She believed that because she could not provide for her children, and because she perceived herself as having no community support, killing them was the only way to ensure they would not suffer further. This distorted logic, while horrific, highlighted the intense level of dissociation and despair she had reached. Her pleaded guilty to 6 counts of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to a term of 50 years. As of July 2026, she remains incarcerated at the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Shakopee, with parole eligibility set for 2031. This case represents a profound systemic failure in providing culturally competent social support. Refugee families often arrive with histories of trauma, yet the existing social service models in 1998 were largely unequipped to bridge the gap between traditional Hmong customs and American legal and social expectations. When communities are left in isolation, they become invisible to the agencies designed to protect them. The Her tragedy serves as a haunting reminder that effective child protection requires more than physical resources. It requires the ability to recognize distress through the lens of a family's cultural experience. It is a call for social service reform that prioritizes linguistic and cultural integration, ensuring that no mother feels her only option for safety is the destruction of her own family. Case 10. On April 9, 2006, in Fujisato, a rural village within the Akita Prefecture of Japan, a tragic sequence of events exposed a profound manipulation of a community's collective trust. Suzuka Hatakiyama, a 33-year-old single mother, pushed her 9-year-old daughter Ayaka from a bridge into the freezing waters of a nearby river. Hatakiyama viewed her daughter as a social and personal burden that compromised her position within the community. The local police initially concluded that the death was a tragic accident, closing the file downstream from the bridge. Rather than withdrawing from public view, Hatakiyama embarked on an aggressive public campaign to dispute the official finding. She marched through the village, openly questioned neighbors, and publicly accused the local police of investigative incompetence. This public performance, framed as a grieving mother's crusade for justice, was a calculated attempt to direct attention away from herself while simultaneously manufacturing community sympathy. The strategy shifted 5 weeks later when a 7-year-old boy, Goken Yoneyama, who lived only 2 doors down from Hatakiyama, vanished on his walk home from school. Driven by intense jealousy over the attention the neighbor's child received, Hatakiyama had lured the boy into her home and ended his life. She then transported his remains in the trunk of her vehicle and discarded them along the banks of the Yonshiro River. The subsequent investigation moved rapidly from suspicion to forensic certainty. Forensic technicians processed Hatakiyama's vehicle, uncovering critical physical evidence. Analysts recovered hair samples from the victim's clothing that matched references from Hatakiyama's residence. Furthermore, distinct carpet fibers retrieved from the boy's clothes provided a precise forensic match to the interior lining of Hatakiyama's car trunk. Traces of biological matter were also detected within the entryway of her home and inside her deceased daughter's bedroom. Faced with this evidence, Hatakiyama confessed, offering a distorted rationale that she had committed the second crime so the boy could provide companionship for her daughter in the afterlife. The court rejected a defense of diminished capacity, sentencing Hatakiyama to life imprisonment. As of July 2026, she remains incarcerated within the Japanese prison system. The case of Suzuka Hatakiyama illustrates a critical systemic vulnerability: the failure of investigative bodies to identify performative, attention-seeking behavior as a potential cover for criminal culpability. When individuals insert themselves aggressively into community outreach and public campaigns following a crime, Their actions are often reflexively interpreted as grief rather than deception. This tragedy underscores the necessity for modern law enforcement to analyze behavioral anomalies objectively. It serves as a lesson in the importance of maintaining scientific rigor over public sentiment, ensuring that the loudest voices do not obscure the physical evidence left behind. Case 11. On the morning of October 14, 2011, in a quiet residential area near Liberty, South Carolina, a scene of profound domestic destruction was discovered. Susan Hendricks, a 48-year-old mother, had carried out the systematic elimination of 4 of her family members: her 23-year-old son, Matthew, her stepmother, Linda Burns, her ex-husband, Mark, and her 20-year-old son, Marshall. The timeline of the investigation began at 6:30 a.m. when Hendricks contacted her sister, alleging that Matthew had taken his own life. Law enforcement arrived to find a .380 caliber handgun placed near Matthew's body and a handwritten note on the kitchen counter intended to frame him for the family's deaths. However, the forensic evidence immediately diverged from the narrative Hendricks provided. Technicians analyzed the scene, finding spent shell casings concealed inside a closet, while the spatial distribution of the victims across 2 separate properties contradicted the premise of a single shooter acting in a state of distress. The decisive forensic proof, however, was derived from gunshot residue, GSR, testing. Hendricks' clothing showed high concentrations of gunshot residue, whereas testing confirmed that Matthew's hands and body were entirely devoid of such particles. This verified that the individual who reported the crime was, in fact, the person who had fired the weapon. The motive was revealed through a subsequent financial audit. Hendricks had secured 9 individual life insurance policies on her family members, totaling $700,000, naming herself as the sole beneficiary on every document. This financial architecture provided a clear blueprint for the crime. Hendricks had executed the family not due to immediate emotional volatility, but as a long-term plan to resolve her mounting debt through the elimination of her own relatives. In April 2013, Hendricks entered a plea of guilty, but mentally ill to 4 counts of murder. She received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As of July 2026, she remains incarcerated within the South Carolina prison system. The Hendricks case illustrates a critical systemic vulnerability: the lack of oversight regarding multiple life insurance policies. When individuals can hold excessive, high-value policies on family members without demonstrated financial necessity or regular auditing, it creates a lethal financial incentive. This case highlights the necessity for insurance entities and investigative bodies to implement mandatory cross-referencing of beneficiary data, which could serve as a vital warning system for identifying potential domestic risks before a catastrophic event occurs.